Hey guys, tonight we're slipping through the heavy oak doors of medieval royal bedchambers, where silk curtains concealed more than just sleeping monarchs. You're about to discover that behind those ornate tapestries and golden bed frames lay a world of paranoia, passion, and political intrigue that would make modern scandals seem like children's games. The story may solve mysteries you never had an explanation for about how power really worked in the shadows of history's most opulent sleeping quarters. So, before you explore the story with me, please take a moment to help me subscribe to the channel, like and share this video, or maybe leave a comment below, but make sure you do it when you really like what I bring to you. Feel free to let me know where and when you started watching this video, or perhaps share what draws you to these mysterious historical tales. Your engagement helps bring these forgotten stories to more curious minds like yours. Now let's keep the lights as soft as possible. Turn on the fan for a gentle sound to help the story feel more emotional, and let's embark on tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing before the massive wooden doors of a 12th century royal bedchamber, their iron hinges creaking as they swing open to reveal a room that defies every assumption you might have about medieval architecture. These weren't simply places where kings and queens rested their heads. They were sophisticated fortress sanctuaries, designed with the paranoid precision of military engineers who understood that a monarch's most vulnerable moment came when sleep claimed their consciousness. The first thing that strikes you is the sheer thickness of the walls surrounding the royal bed. You run your fingers along stone blocks that measure nearly 4 feet deep, each one carefully selected not just for structural integrity, but for their acoustic properties. Medieval architects discover that certain limestone compositions could muffle sounds from both directions, preventing eavesdroppers from hearing royal conversations, while also ensuring that the approaching footsteps would be detected by the chamber's occupants. As you step deeper into the room, you notice something peculiar about the floor beneath your feet. The wooden planks don't quite align perfectly, and when you press down on certain sections, you hear the faint echo of hollow spaces below. These aren't construction flaws, they're deliberately designed escape routes. Beneath nearly every major royal bedchamber in medieval Europe lay a network of tunnels that could spirit a monarch away in moments of crisis. The bed itself dominates the centre of the room, but its positioning isn't arbitrary. You observe how it's been placed at precisely the point where someone lying down would have clear sightlines to every entrance, including the hidden passages whose locations were known only to the monarch and their most trusted servants. The massive four-poster frame isn't just decorative. Those thick wooden posts could stop crossbow bolts, and the heavy curtains could be drawn to create a temporary fortress within a fortress. But perhaps most intriguing are the seemingly innocent decorative elements that serve dual purposes. You notice that several of the ornate wall sconces can be rotated, and when you experiment with one, a section of the wall slides away to reveal a narrow corridor. Medieval royal bedrooms were riddled with these hidden compartments. Some led to escape routes, others to secret meeting chambers where monarchs could conduct the most sensitive affairs of state away from prying eyes. The furniture arrangement tells its own story of paranoia and preparation. That elegant writing desk positioned near the window. Its drawers contain false bottoms where important documents could be hidden at a moment's notice. The ornate mirror reflecting candlelight across the room. Its frame conceals a small viewing port that allows occupants to observe the hallway outside without being seen. You discover that even the bed's construction incorporated security features that would impress modern bodyguards. The mattress, stuffed with the finest goose down, also contained a layer of chainmail sewn between the fabric, protection against stiletto attacks from below. The pillows weren't just filled with soft materials, they contained small bells that would chime if someone attempted to smother the sleeping monarch. Medieval royal bedrooms also featured what we might recognize today as early alarm systems. Thin threads, nearly invisible in candlelight, were strung across doorways and windows. If these threads were broken by an intruder, they would trigger mechanisms that dropped metal objects onto stone floors, creating sounds that would instantly wake even the deepest sleeper. Historians still argue whether these systems were inspired by similar devices used in Byzantine palaces or developed independently by European castle engineers. The windows present their own fascinating security paradox. While they needed to provide light and air circulation, they also represented potential entry points for assassins. You notice how the window design incorporates multiple layers of protection: iron bars on the outside, wooden shutters in the middle, and heavy tapestries on the inside. But look closer, and you'll see that those decorative iron bars aren't uniform. Some can be quickly removed from the inside, transforming windows into emergency exits for a fleeing monarch. Even the chamber's lighting system served security purposes. Those elegant candelabras weren't randomly placed. They're positioned to eliminate shadows where attackers might hide, while ensuring that anyone entering the room would be immediately visible to the bed's occupant. The arrangement creates what medieval security experts called zones of revelation, areas where concealment was impossible. As you absorb these details, you begin to understand that medieval royal bedrooms represented the pinnacle of paranoid architecture. Every element, from the thickness of the walls to the placement of a decorative vase, had been carefully considered by minds that understood that in the medieval world, a monarch's bedroom wasn't just a private retreat. It was ground zero in the endless battle for survival that defined royal life. You settle into the shadows of the royal antechamber as the sun begins its descent, witnessing the beginning of one of medieval Europe's most elaborate and bizarre daily rituals, the Great Bed Ceremony. What you're about to observe would make modern presidential security details seem casual by comparison, as dozens of courtiers, servants, and officials transform a simple act of going to sleep into a choreographed performance that could determine the fate of kingdoms. The ceremony begins 2 hours before the monarch even approaches their bedchamber. You watch as the groom of the stool, yes, that was an actual royal position, enters with a team of trusted servants to begin the preliminary preparations. Every piece of bedding must be examined, shaken out, and inspected for hidden dangers. The mattress is lifted and rotated, the pillows are squeezed and probed, and even the bed curtains are methodically searched for anything that shouldn't be there. As the inspection continues, you notice the arrival of the royal taster, whose job extends far beyond sampling the monarch's dinner. This individual must test not just the bedtime wine and evening medications, but also the water used for washing, the oils applied to the royal skin, and even the ink used for any documents the monarch might sign before sleep. The position carried such prestige that noble families would compete for generations to secure it for their sons, despite the obvious occupational hazards. The procession that follows resembles something between a religious ceremony and a military operation. You count at least 30 individuals, each with specific roles that have been refined over centuries of royal paranoia. The keeper of the royal nightgown leads the way, carrying the monarch's sleeping attire in a locked chest that requires 3 different keys to open. Behind them walks the guardian of the royal slippers, followed by the master of the royal wash basin, whose title sounds almost comical until you realise they're responsible for ensuring the monarch's final ablutions don't become their last. But the most fascinating figure in this procession is the royal sleep observer, a position that existed in several medieval courts and involved literally watching the monarch sleep. These individuals, usually elderly women of unquestionable loyalty, would spend the entire night in a chair beside the royal bed, alert for any signs of distress, illness, or potential attack. They were trained to recognise different types of breathing patterns, unusual movements, and even the subtle changes in complexion that might indicate poisoning. As the monarch finally enters their bedchamber, you witness the ceremony of the 7 locks. The room's security is activated through an intricate sequence that involves 7 different locking mechanisms, each controlled by a different court official. No single person can secure or unlock the royal sleeping quarters. It requires the cooperation of multiple individuals, creating a system of checks and balances that would prevent any single conspirator from gaining access to the vulnerable monarch. The undressing ritual itself unfolds like a carefully rehearsed dance. Each garment is removed by a specific individual and immediately handed to another for inspection and secure storage. The royal doublet bearer cannot touch the royal hose, and the individual responsible for the royal undergarments must never handle the outer clothing. This isn't mere ceremony. It's a security protocol designed to prevent any single person from having the opportunity to plant dangerous items or collect intelligence about the monarch's physical condition. You observe something particularly intriguing about the bedtime prayers that conclude each evening's ceremony. While they appear to be standard religious observances, these prayers actually contain coded language that communicates the day's security status to the various participants. A particular phrase about peaceful rest might indicate that all is well, while a reference to troubled dreams could signal that extra precautions should be taken during the night. Medieval French courts elevated this ceremony to extraordinary heights of complexity. The ritual could involve up to 50 participants, including musicians whose job was to play specific melodies that would both soothe the monarch to sleep and mask any sounds that might indicate approaching danger. These weren't simple lullabies. They were carefully composed pieces that incorporated acoustic techniques designed to enhance the listener's ability to detect unusual sounds outside the normal musical patterns. The ceremony's conclusion involves what medieval sources describe as the Great Silence, a moment when all participants freeze in place while the royal sleep observer conducts a final visual sweep of the chamber. Any movement, sound, or irregularity during these crucial seconds could trigger an immediate security response. Only when the observer gives the all-clear signal do the participants begin their quiet withdrawal from the royal presence. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the Great Bed Ceremony was its psychological function. Medieval chroniclers noted that monarchs who skipped or abbreviated these rituals often suffered from insomnia and paranoia. The elaborate procedures weren't just about physical security. They created a sense of protective ritual that allowed rulers to surrender consciousness, knowing that their vulnerability was being guarded by layers upon layers of loyal servants. Historians still argue whether these ceremonies were primarily practical security measures or psychological comfort rituals, but court records from the period suggest they served both purposes effectively. Some monarchs became so dependent on the routine that they couldn't sleep properly when travelling, leading to the development of portable versions of the ceremony that could be performed in temporary quarters. The ceremony's influence extended beyond the royal bedchamber, creating a hierarchical system of evening rituals throughout the court. Lesser nobles began developing their own abbreviated versions, and wealthy merchants attempted to copy elements of the royal routine, leading to an entire industry of sleep ceremony consultants, medieval predecessors to modern lifestyle coaches who specialized in helping the wealthy create elaborate bedtime routines. As you watch the final participants withdraw from the royal presence, pulling the great doors closed behind them, you realize you've witnessed something far more complex than a simple bedtime routine. You've observed a sophisticated security protocol, a religious ceremony, a psychological comfort ritual, and a political statement about royal power all rolled into one elaborate nightly performance. You crouch in the pre-dawn darkness outside the royal bedchamber, your heart pounding as you witness the very real terror that transformed medieval royal sleep into a nightly battle for survival. The paranoia you're about to discover wasn't unfounded hysteria. It was a rational response to a world where a monarch's bed had become the preferred location for political assassination, and where the transition from consciousness to sleep represented the most dangerous moments in any ruler's day. The statistics alone would keep any sensible person awake forever. Historical records suggest that Nearly 1/3 of medieval European monarchs died in their beds under suspicious circumstances, and another quarter survived assassination attempts that occurred while they were sleeping or preparing for sleep. These weren't random acts of violence. They were carefully orchestrated political operations that exploited the one time when even the most powerful ruler became helplessly vulnerable. You observe the elaborate precautions that evolved in response to this threat, starting with the weapons cache that every prudent monarch kept within arm's reach of their pillow. That ornate chest beside the bed doesn't contain jewellery. It holds a selection of daggers, each designed for specific types of close-quarter combat. The longest blade is for attackers approaching from the foot of the bed, the curved dagger is for assailants who might approach from the sides, and the thin stiletto is designed to penetrate the gaps in chainmail armour that an assassin might wear. But weapons were useless if the monarch couldn't wake up to use them, which led to the development of what medieval security experts called graduated alertness systems. You notice a series of small bells attached to barely visible wires that crisscross the chamber at ankle height. These weren't just alarm systems. They were designed to provide different tonal warnings depending on how they were triggered, allowing a drowsy monarch to instantly understand whether they were facing a single intruder, multiple attackers, or a full-scale assault. The bedtime wine-tasting ritual you witnessed earlier takes on darker significance when you learn about the sophisticated poisons available to medieval assassins. The royal taster wasn't just checking for obvious toxins. They were trained to detect delayed action poisons that might not show effects for hours, giving an assassin time to establish an alibi. Some tasters developed such refined palates that they could identify specific poison types by subtle changes in taste, texture, or aroma. Medieval monarchs also employed what we might recognize today as chemical detection systems. Those decorative flowers arranged around the bedchamber weren't chosen for their beauty. Certain plants would change colour or wilt when exposed to airborne toxins. White roses were particularly prized because they would develop dark spots if poison gases were introduced into the chamber, while certain herbs would release distinctive scents when their leaves detected foreign chemicals. You discover that the royal bed's construction incorporated defensive features that would impress modern security designers. The mattress contained not just chainmail, but also a layer of specially treated leather that would resist cutting implements. The bed frame itself was hollow and filled with small metal objects that would create noise if someone attempted to saw through the support posts. Even the bed curtains served defensive purposes. They were woven with metal threads that could entangle weapons and slow down attackers. The most paranoid monarchs took these precautions to extraordinary lengths. King John of England reportedly slept with a different weapon under his pillow each night, rotating through a collection of 17 daggers to prevent potential assassins from knowing exactly what they might face. He also employed a technique called false sleeping, where you would appear to be asleep while actually remaining alert and ready to spring into action. But perhaps the most ingenious defensive innovation was the development of decoy sleeping chambers. You learn that many royal residences contained multiple bedrooms that appeared to be the monarch's primary sleeping quarters. While courtiers and potential assassins focused their attention on the obvious royal bedchamber, the actual monarch might be sleeping in a servant's room, a hidden chamber, or even outdoors in a carefully concealed tent within the castle grounds. The psychological toll of this constant vigilance was enormous. Medieval physicians wrote extensively about royal sleeplessness, a condition that affected monarchs who became so paranoid about nighttime attacks that they developed chronic insomnia. Some rulers would only sleep during daylight hours, when they felt more secure, leading to completely inverted daily schedules that confused their courts and complicated diplomatic relations. Historians still argue whether the threat of bedroom assassination was as widespread as royal security measures suggest, but the surviving evidence indicates that the fear was well-founded. Palace records from the period document dozens of foiled assassination attempts that occurred in or near royal sleeping quarters, and many successful murders that initially appeared to be natural deaths were later revealed to have been carefully orchestrated poisonings. The paranoia reached such heights that some monarchs began employing professional sleep doubles, individuals who bore physical resemblances to the ruler and would spend nights in the royal bed while the actual monarch slept elsewhere. These doubles faced obvious risks, but the position offered social advancement and financial rewards that attracted volunteers from the lower nobility. Advanced medieval security also included what we might call behavioural analysis. Royal guards were trained to observe the normal nighttime routines of palace staff and identify anyone whose behaviour deviated from established patterns. A servant who suddenly began working different hours, a courtier who showed unusual interest in the royal bedchambers layout, or a guest who asked too many questions about sleeping arrangements would be flagged for additional surveillance. The weapons training that royal security required extended beyond simple combat skills. Guards needed to be able to fight effectively in complete darkness, in confined spaces, and while protecting a potentially disoriented monarch who had just been awakened from deep sleep. They practiced scenarios where they might need to evacuate a ruler through hidden passages while under attack, or defend a bedchamber against multiple assailants approaching from different directions. As dawn breaks and you retreat from your hiding place, you realize that medieval royal bedrooms weren't just sleeping quarters. They were the epicenters of an arms race between assassins and defenders that pushed both sides to develop increasingly sophisticated techniques for attack and protection. You slip through a concealed passage behind the royal tapestries, following the whispered secrets and coded messages that reveal medieval royal bedchambers as the nerve centres of Europe's most scandalous love affairs. What you're about to uncover will show you that behind every grand political marriage lay a web of hidden romances, secret tunnels, and elaborate deceptions that turned royal sleeping quarters into stages for the most dangerous game of all, forbidden love. The architecture of royal infidelity was as carefully planned as any military fortification. You trace your fingers along the seemingly solid stone wall behind the royal bed, discovering that certain blocks can be pushed inward to reveal narrow corridors barely wide enough for a single person to pass through. These weren't just escape routes. They were love highways that connected royal bedchambers to the quarters of lovers, mistresses, and secret spouses whose very existence could topple kingdoms. Medieval court records, written in deliberately obscure language, document an intricate system of romantic espionage that would make modern intelligence agencies envious. You learn about the language of flowers, not the Victorian system you might know, but an earlier, more complex code where different blooms left in specific locations could communicate everything from "meet me at midnight" to "the king suspects nothing" to "flee immediately, we've been discovered." The logistics of royal adultery required extraordinary coordination. Palace servants were recruited into networks of romantic conspiracy, with laundresses who would wash away evidence of clandestine encounters, kitchen staff who would prepare special meals for secret rendezvous, and guards who would develop convenient periods of blindness when certain individuals needed to move through supposedly secure areas. You discover that some of the most elaborate furniture in royal bedchambers served dual purposes that had nothing to do with sleep or storage. That magnificent armoire with its intricate wood carvings, its back panel slides away to reveal a cramped but functional hiding space where a lover could wait for hours until the coast was clear. The ornate prayer kneeler beside the bed, its hollow base could conceal love letters, gifts, or even changes of clothing for romantic partners who needed to enter and leave the chamber in different disguises. Medieval royal affairs weren't just matters of the heart, they were geopolitical weapons that could shift the balance of power across continents. You learn about Eleanor of Aquitaine's legendary romantic network, which allegedly included secret passages connecting her quarters to those of multiple lovers. including some who were officially her political enemies. The intelligence she gathered during these intimate encounters reportedly influenced major military campaigns and diplomatic negotiations. The most sophisticated royal love affairs involved what contemporary sources called shadow marriages, secret wedding ceremonies that were legally binding but politically invisible. These ceremonies often took place in hidden chambers, accessible only through the concealed passages you've been exploring, with witnesses sworn to secrecy under pain of death and priests who specialized in performing weddings that would never appear in official church records. But the greatest risk came from children born of these secret unions. Medieval royal bedchambers contained hidden compartments specifically designed to conceal evidence of pregnancy and secret births. You examine what appears to be an ordinary chest for storing linens, but its false bottom reveals a space large enough to hide medical supplies, birthing equipment, and documents related to children whose existence could never be acknowledged. The paranoia surrounding royal affairs created its own elaborate security measures. Lovers developed coded knocking patterns that would identify them to servants, used specific perfumes that would signal their presence without revealing their identities, and employed body doubles who could create alibis by being seen in public while the actual person was engaged in a romantic tryst. Historians still argue whether Queen Isabella of France actually used the extensive tunnel system beneath the royal palace to conduct her affair with Roger Mortimer, but architectural evidence suggests that these passages were modified during her residence to include comfortable waiting areas, ventilation systems, and even primitive plumbing that would allow extended stays underground. The religious implications of royal adultery added another layer of complexity to these secret arrangements. Confessional booths in private royal chapels were equipped with hidden compartments where love letters could be exchanged, and some court chaplains served double duty as romantic messengers, carrying coded messages disguised as religious correspondence between royal chambers and the quarters of secret lovers. Medieval queens faced particular challenges in conducting affairs, as their every movement was monitored by ladies-in-waiting whose loyalty couldn't always be guaranteed. This led to the development of what court documents refer to as collective deception, elaborate schemes where multiple women would coordinate their activities to provide cover for the queen's romantic activities. One woman might fake an illness requiring the queen's attention, while another would arrange a hunting party that would take potential witnesses away from the palace. The technology of romantic deception included some surprisingly sophisticated innovations. Mechanical devices could create sounds that would mask conversations or footsteps in adjacent rooms. Mirrors were positioned to provide early warning of approaching interruptions. Even the royal bed itself might contain hidden compartments where incriminating evidence could be quickly concealed if unexpected visitors arrived. The consequences of discovery were severe enough to drive some lovers to extraordinary measures. Palace records document cases where men literally lived in hidden chambers for months, never emerging into public view, sustained by loyal servants who risked their own lives to maintain the deception. Some of these hidden lovers were discovered only decades later, when renovation work revealed secret rooms containing the remains of individuals who had chosen death over exposure. Perhaps most intriguingly, some royal love affairs were actually encouraged by political advisors who recognized their strategic value. A queen's romantic relationship with an enemy ambassador might provide access to crucial intelligence, while the king's affair with a rival's wife could create opportunities for blackmail or manipulation. The elaborate systems developed to facilitate and conceal royal affairs influenced architecture throughout medieval Europe. Noble families began incorporating similar hidden passages and secret chambers into their own residences, creating an architectural legacy of romantic deception that can still be discovered in castles and manor houses today. As you emerge from the hidden passages back into the royal bedchamber, you realise that you've explored more than secret love affairs. You've uncovered the infrastructure of an entire parallel court system where emotions, desires and political ambitions intersected in ways that shaped the course of European history. You hold your breath as you enter the private washing chamber adjacent to the royal bedroom, unprepared for the shocking revelation that medieval royal hygiene was far more complex and disturbing than any history book would dare to admit. What you're about to discover will shatter every assumption about medieval cleanliness and reveal that royal bathing habits were driven not by comfort or health, but by a bizarre mixture of medical superstition, political strategy, and genuine terror of water itself. The ornate copper bathtub before you tells a story that contradicts everything you thought you knew about medieval hygiene. This isn't evidence of cleanliness, it's a monument to paranoia. Medieval royals didn't bathe regularly because they enjoyed being clean. They bathed according to elaborate schedules calculated by court physicians who believed that water could literally wash away a person's natural defences against disease, poison, and evil spirits. You examine the intricate filtration system that supplied water to royal bathing facilities, discovering that it involved not just physical straining through cloth and sand, but also spiritual purification rituals performed by court chaplains. Every drop of water used on a royal body had to be blessed, tested for poison, and sometimes even aged like wine in special containers to ensure it had achieved what medieval medical texts called royal temperament. The bathing schedule itself followed astrological calculations that would make modern horoscope writers seem casual by comparison. Court astrologers would spend weeks determining the optimal times for royal bathing, taking into account lunar phases, planetary alignments, and seasonal transitions. Some monarchs might go months without bathing because the stars weren't properly aligned, while others would be required to bathe multiple times during astrologically favourable periods. But the most shocking discovery awaits in the collection of medieval royal bathing recipes preserved in palace archives. These aren't simple soap formulations. They're complex alchemical concoctions that included ingredients like powdered unicorn horn, actually narwhal tusk, virgin's tears, a type of tree sap, and blood from creatures killed during specific lunar phases. One recipe for Queen Isabella's personal bathing mixture required ingredients gathered from 7 different countries and took 3 months to prepare properly. Medieval royal bodies were also subject to bizarre cleaning rituals that had nothing to do with water. You discover implements designed for what court documents call dry washing, elaborate scraping and rubbing procedures performed with silk cloths, precious metals, and various powders. Some monarchs preferred this method because they believed water made their skin too vulnerable to absorb poisons through external contact. The political implications of royal bathing created diplomatic incidents that influenced international relations. Refusing to bathe before meeting foreign dignitaries could be interpreted as an insult, while bathing too frequently might suggest vanity or worse, an attempt to wash away evidence of secret activities. Court records document at least 3 wars that were partially triggered by misunderstandings related to royal bathing protocols. Medieval royal soap represented a luxury so extreme that it was sometimes used as currency in international negotiations. These weren't simple cleaning products. They were complex compounds that included rare spices, precious oils, and ingredients that had to be harvested during specific conditions. Some royal soap recipes were considered state secrets, as closely guarded as military intelligence. You learn about the extraordinary profession of royal bath attendants, whose training resembled that of modern doctors. These individuals needed to understand not just hygiene, but medicine, chemistry, and psychology. They could diagnose illnesses by examining the water after a royal bath, detect poison attempts by observing how the monarch's skin reacted to different substances, and even provide psychological counselling during what were often traumatic bathing experiences. Historians still argue whether medieval royals actually smelled as bad as popular culture suggests, but palace inventories reveal sophisticated perfume and scent masking systems that indicate odour was indeed a significant concern. Some monarchs employed specialised servants whose only job was to walk ahead of them, burning specific incense mixtures designed to neutralise offensive smells before they could reach the royal nostrils. The relationship between bathing and sexuality in medieval royal courts was governed by complex rules that regulated when monarchs could be clean or dirty for romantic encounters. Some royal marriages required both partners to bathe according to specific protocols before consummating their union, while others demanded that certain types of physical intimacy occur only when one or both partners were deliberately unwashed. Medieval dental hygiene among royalty followed equally bizarre protocols. Those ornate golden toothpicks weren't just status symbols. They were medical instruments used to perform daily mouth surgeries that were believed necessary to prevent tooth demons from entering the royal body. Some monarchs had their teeth cleaned with solutions that included ground pearls, dissolved gold, and various substances that we now know were highly toxic. The hair-washing rituals of medieval queens involved procedures so complex that they required teams of specialists and could take entire days to complete. Royal hair was washed with solutions that included everything from fermented grape juice to liquefied precious metals, and the drying process involved heated stones, rare fabrics, and sometimes even controlled exposure to specific types of smoke. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of medieval royal hygiene was the belief that excessive cleanliness could be politically dangerous. Some court physicians argued that monarchs needed to maintain their natural scent as a form of identification and protection, the theory being that assassins might be confused or deterred by the presence of royal body odours that they couldn't replicate. The seasonal bathing restrictions imposed on some medieval royals were so severe that they approached what we might recognise today as medical neglect. Certain monarchs were forbidden to wash during winter months, regardless of their personal comfort, because court physicians believed that cold water could literally freeze the royal blood, or that wet skin during cold weather could allow evil spirits to enter through the pores. Medieval royal chamber pots and toilet facilities reveal another shocking truth about royal hygiene. These essential items were often shared among court members as a form of political privilege. Being allowed to use the royal toilet was considered an honour that indicated high status and trust, leading to complex hierarchies based on bathroom access rights. As you examine the final piece of evidence, a collection of medieval royal undergarments preserved in the palace archives, you realise that these weren't just clothing items, but complex filtration systems designed to protect royal skin from direct contact with outer garments, while also serving as repositories for the various powders, oils and medications that comprised medieval royal hygiene routines. You find yourself in the royal council chamber as the first hints of dawn pierce the darkness, witnessing how medieval monarchs weaponized their sleep schedules to control kingdoms and crush enemies through the devastating political tool of strategic exhaustion. What you're about to discover reveals that royal bedtimes weren't personal preferences, but calculated instruments of power that could determine the outcome of wars, marriages, and succession disputes. The medieval royal day operated on principles that would bewilder modern sleep scientists. You observe how kings and queens deliberately inverted natural circadian rhythms to maintain political advantage over their subjects and rivals. By conducting the most important business during hours when other nobles were naturally drowsy, monarchs could negotiate better treaties, extract more favourable concessions, and identify potential traitors whose judgment was compromised by sleep deprivation. Court records reveal the existence of what medieval political theorists called temporal sovereignty. The idea that controlling when people slept and woke was as important as controlling their lands and resources. Monarchs would summon courtiers for crucial meetings at 3 in the morning, not out of convenience, but as a deliberate strategy to ensure that important decisions were made when their advisors were least capable of mounting effective opposition or remembering compromising details. You discover that royal sleep schedules were carefully coordinated with military campaigns to maximize strategic advantage. Medieval generals learned to plan major battles during periods when enemy rulers were known to be in their deepest sleep phases, understanding that delayed responses from opposing courts could provide crucial tactical benefits. Some victories were won not through superior weaponry or tactics, but simply by attacking when enemy leadership was literally unconscious. The diplomatic implications of royal sleep timing created an entire protocol system that governed international relations. Foreign ambassadors had to adjust their body clocks to match their host monarch's schedule, leading to a form of biological warfare where visiting dignitaries would arrive already exhausted and disoriented. Palace records document negotiations where crucial concessions were extracted from sleep-deprived foreign representatives who couldn't think clearly enough to recognize unfavorable terms. Medieval royal courts employed specialized servants called sleep marshals, whose job was to manage the complex logistics of royal rest schedules. These individuals maintained detailed charts tracking the sleep patterns of not just their own monarch, but also rival rulers, important nobles, and key political figures throughout Europe. This intelligence was used to time everything from marriage proposals to war declarations for maximum psychological impact. You learn about the terrifying practice of sleep punishment, where medieval monarchs would deliberately disrupt the rest of courtiers who had fallen from favour. Disobedient nobles might find themselves summoned for meaningless tasks at all hours of the night, or assigned duties that required them to remain awake during their natural sleep periods. This form of torture could break powerful individuals without leaving any physical evidence of abuse. The relationship between royal sleep and succession planning reveals some of the most Byzantine political calculations in medieval history. Heirs to thrones were often deliberately kept on different sleep schedules from their parents, ensuring that potential palace coups would face the logistical challenge of coordinating between individuals whose biological clocks were completely misaligned. Historians still argue whether the famous midnight massacre of competing nobles actually occurred during sleeping hours by design, but contemporary accounts suggest that medieval rulers preferred to eliminate political rivals during the deep sleep periods when their targets would be most vulnerable and least likely to mount effective resistance or summon help. The medical understanding of sleep in medieval royal courts was surprisingly sophisticated, with court physicians developing theories about how different sleep phases affected decision-making capabilities. Royal doctors could predict when monarchs would be most susceptible to manipulation, most likely to make rash decisions, or most capable of complex strategic thinking based entirely on their recent sleep patterns. Medieval queens used sleep scheduling as a weapon in their own political arsenals, particularly in conflicts with their husbands over succession or policy. By controlling access to the royal bedchamber and manipulating when intimate conversations could occur, queens could influence major political decisions by ensuring that crucial discussions happened only when kings were in specific mental states induced by particular sleep phases. The economic implications of royal sleep schedules extended throughout medieval society. Entire industries adapted their operations to match royal rest patterns, with merchants timing major transactions, craftsmen scheduling project completions, and farmers planning harvest activities around the sleep cycles of their monarchs. Some historians suggest that regional economic fluctuations can be directly traced to changes in royal sleep habits. But perhaps the most insidious aspect of weaponized royal sleep was its psychological impact on court culture. Nobles lived in constant anxiety about when they might be summoned, leading to chronic sleep disorders throughout the upper classes. Palace physicians wrote extensively about what they called anticipatory insomnia, a condition where courtiers became so worried about potential nighttime summons that they couldn't sleep even when they had the opportunity. Medieval royal marriage negotiations included detailed discussions about sleep compatibility between potential spouses. Diplomatic correspondence reveals that some political alliances failed because the intended partners had incompatible sleep schedules that would have made their union politically ineffective. Royal matchmakers became experts in circadian rhythm compatibility, understanding that mismatched sleep patterns could doom both personal relationships and international agreements. The intelligence-gathering possibilities created by royal sleep scheduling were extraordinary. Monarchs could learn which of their courtiers were meeting secretly by observing who appeared tired at unexpected times. Changes in the sleep patterns of important nobles could indicate everything from illicit affairs to treasonous plotting, making sleep surveillance a crucial tool of medieval statecraft. Advanced practitioners of sleep politics developed techniques that modern behavioral scientists would recognize as sophisticated psychological manipulation. By gradually shifting their own sleep schedules, monarchs could slowly condition important courtiers to accept increasingly inconvenient meeting times, eventually gaining the ability to summon anyone at any hour without resistance. The religious implications of royal sleep scheduling created theological debates that influenced church policy for centuries. Medieval theologians argued about whether deliberately disrupting natural sleep patterns violated divine law, leading to papal declarations about the proper relationship between royal authority and God's intended human rest cycles. As you watch the sun rise over the medieval landscape, you realise that royal sleep wasn't just about personal rest. It was a sophisticated political weapon that turned the basic human need for sleep into a tool of control, manipulation, and strategic advantage that shaped the course of European history. You creep through the pre-dawn shadows of the royal bedchamber, your fingers tracing the countless protective amulets, sacred relics, and supernatural defences that transform every medieval royal sleeping space into a fortress against the spirit world. What you're about to uncover will reveal that medieval monarchs faced terrors far beyond human assassins. They battled demons, ghosts, and supernatural forces that could strike during the vulnerable hours of sleep, requiring elaborate magical defences that blurred the line between faith and superstition. The ornate cross hanging above the royal bed is just the beginning of an intricate supernatural security system that would impress modern paranormal investigators. You discover that medieval royal bedchambers contained protection devices specifically designed to combat different types of spiritual threats. Iron horseshoes were embedded in the walls to repel fairy folk. Circles of salt were renewed nightly around the bed perimeter to trap malevolent spirits, and bundles of rowan wood were hung from the ceiling to prevent demonic possession during vulnerable dream states. Medieval court records document a specialized profession known as royal ghost hunters, individuals whose job was to cleanse royal sleeping quarters of supernatural threats. These weren't simple exorcists, but highly trained specialists who understood the complex spiritual politics of medieval royal courts. They could identify which type of supernatural entity was causing nightmares, determine whether ghostly visitations were politically motivated, and even negotiate with spirits who claimed legitimate grievances against the crown. You examine the elaborate collection of blessed objects that surrounds the royal sleeping area, each item carefully chosen for specific protective properties. That jeweled chalice on the bedside table isn't just decorative. It contains holy water blessed by 7 different bishops during specific lunar phases, creating what medieval theologians believed was the most powerful spiritual defense possible. The ornate dagger beside it has been consecrated specifically for fighting supernatural enemies that couldn't be harmed by conventional weapons. The positioning of religious artifacts follows patterns that reveal sophisticated understanding of what medieval scholars called sacred geometry. You notice how crosses reliquaries, and blessed candles are arranged in specific configurations designed to create overlapping fields of divine protection. Medieval royal chambers contained mathematical arrangements of holy objects that were calculated to eliminate any spiritual blind spots where evil entities might find refuge. But the most fascinating supernatural defences involve the use of captured spirits as protective guardians. Medieval royal bedchambers often housed what court documents describe as bound ghosts, spirits of deceased loyal servants who are magically compelled to remain in the royal chambers as supernatural bodyguards. These ethereal protectors could detect spiritual threats that human guards would miss, and fight battles in dimensions that living defenders couldn't access. Medieval dream interpretation in royal courts operated as a complex intelligence gathering system where supernatural visitations were analysed for political significance. Court dream interpreters maintained detailed records of royal nighttime visions, cross-referencing spiritual encounters with political events to determine whether ghostly visitations might actually be attempts at supernatural espionage by rival kingdoms or disgruntled nobles who had turned to necromancy for revenge. You discover evidence of what medieval sources call spiritual early warning systems, networks of sensitive individuals positioned throughout royal residences who could detect supernatural activity before it reached the monarch's bedchamber. These human spiritual sensors would experience headaches, nausea, or anxiety when malevolent entities approached the royal sleeping quarters, providing advance warning that allowed supernatural defences to be activated before the king or queen was directly threatened. The relationship between royal bloodlines and supernatural vulnerability created unique challenges that required specialised protective measures. Medieval theologians believed that royal blood attracted both beneficial and malevolent spiritual attention, making monarchs simultaneously more powerful in spiritual matters and more vulnerable to supernatural attack. This led to the development of bloodline-specific protection rituals that had to be customised for each royal family's particular spiritual strengths and weaknesses. Historians still argue whether the extensive supernatural defences found in medieval royal bedchambers represent genuine spiritual beliefs or sophisticated psychological comfort systems, but contemporary accounts describe specific incidents where these protections allegedly saved royal lives from supernatural assassination attempts that would have been invisible to conventional security measures. Medieval royal nightmare management involved elaborate protocols that treated bad dreams as potential national security threats. When monarchs experienced particularly disturbing dreams, teams of specialists would be summoned to determine whether the visions represented divine warnings about real political dangers, attacks by supernatural enemies, or attempts by rival courts to influence royal decision-making through magical means. The seasonal supernatural threats faced by medieval royals required constantly changing protective measures. Spring brought fairy folk who might steal royal dreams, summer attracted fire spirits that could induce fever during sleep, autumn unleashed harvest demons who sought to possess sleeping rulers, and winter opened pathways for ghostly ancestors who might have grievances with current royal policies. Advanced supernatural protection systems included what medieval sources describe as spirit traps, elaborate magical devices designed to capture hostile entities that penetrated other defences. These contraptions, often disguised as ordinary furniture or decorations, could supposedly imprison supernatural attackers until they could be properly exorcised or banished by court specialists. The international implications of royal supernatural defences created diplomatic challenges that influenced medieval foreign relations. Some royal marriages required extensive negotiation about which protective spirits would be allowed in shared bedchambers, while others failed entirely because the supernatural guardians of different royal bloodlines were considered incompatible or potentially hostile to each other. Medieval royal children faced particular supernatural vulnerabilities that required specialized protection systems. Young heirs were believed to be especially attractive targets for child-stealing fairies, dream-eating demons, and malevolent spirits seeking to possess future monarchs while their spiritual defenses were still developing. Royal nurseries contained protective measures that made adult bedchambers seem simple by comparison. The most sophisticated supernatural defense systems included what court records describe as spiritual surveillance networks. Arrangements of blessed mirrors, consecrated crystals, and other mystical objects that allowed royal guards to monitor supernatural activity throughout palace complexes. These networks could supposedly detect spiritual intrusions, track the movements of invisible entities, and even communicate warnings about supernatural threats across vast distances. Religious authorities sometimes clashed with royal courts over supernatural defense systems that incorporated non-Christian elements. Medieval royal bedchambers often contained protective devices borrowed from pagan traditions, folk magic, and foreign spiritual practices, creating theological controversies about whether such defenses were divine protection or dangerous dabbling in forbidden arts. As you complete your examination of these elaborate supernatural defenses, you realize that medieval royal bedchambers weren't just protected against human threats, they were battlegrounds in a spiritual war, where the stakes included not just royal lives, but the souls of monarchs and the divine legitimacy of their rule. You step into the candlelit royal physician's quarters adjacent to the bedchamber, your senses immediately assaulted by the pungent aromas of herbs, heated metals, and mysterious concoctions that reveal the shocking truth about medieval royal healthcare. What you're about to discover will expose how royal bedrooms doubled as medical laboratories where monarchs underwent treatments so bizarre and dangerous that they often proved more lethal than the diseases they were meant to cure. The ornate medical cabinet dominating one wall contains instruments that would horrify modern doctors, but were considered cutting-edge technology in medieval royal healthcare. You examine bloodletting devices specifically designed for use during sleep, elaborate contraptions that could drain royal blood while monarchs remained unconscious, based on the medical theory that nighttime bloodletting was more effective because the body's humours were naturally more receptive to rebalancing during rest periods. Medieval royal physicians operated under medical theories that combined legitimate observation with dangerous superstition, creating treatment protocols that transformed bedchambers into scenes from a medical horror story. Court records describe nightly procedures where monarchs would be subjected to controlled poisoning sessions, small doses of various toxins administered to build immunity against potential assassination attempts, often resulting in chronic illnesses that physicians then treated with even more dangerous remedies. You discover evidence of what medieval medical texts called royal blood optimization, a practice where court physicians would attempt to improve monarchs' health by mixing their blood with various substances including ground precious stones, powdered unicorn horn, and liquid mercury. These treatments were performed during sleep to minimize the psychological trauma of watching one's own blood being manipulated with potentially lethal additives. The sleeping medication systems used in medieval royal courts reveal a sophisticated understanding of pharmacology combined with a terrifying willingness to experiment on irreplaceable subjects. Royal physicians maintained detailed charts tracking the effects of different sleep-inducing compounds on their monarchs, including combinations that we now know were highly toxic. Some monarchs developed such severe dependencies on these medications that they couldn't sleep without increasingly dangerous doses. Medieval royal bedchambers contained specialized furniture designed to facilitate medical procedures that couldn't be performed elsewhere. That ornate couch near the window isn't just seating, it's actually a surgical table designed for procedures that needed to be kept secret from the general court. The upholstery contains hidden compartments for medical instruments, and the positioning allows natural light for daytime operations while maintaining privacy from courtyard observers. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of royal bedroom medicine was the practice of preemptive surgery, procedures performed on healthy monarchs to prevent potential future illnesses. Medieval physicians would remove organs, amputate potentially problematic body parts, and perform experimental surgeries based on astrological predictions about what medical problems might affect the royal family. Many monarchs suffered lifelong disabilities from these preventive treatments. The herbal medicine systems used in royal bedchambers involved compounds so complex that their preparation required teams of specialists and could take months to complete properly. You examine recipes that call for ingredients gathered during specific weather conditions, processed according to lunar cycles, and combined using mathematical ratios based on the monarch's astrological chart. Some of these medicines were so powerful that they could induce temporary death-like states that physicians used for performing major surgeries. Historians still argue whether the extensive medical experimentation conducted in medieval royal bedchambers was driven by genuine concern for royal health or by physicians' desires to advance their own careers through prestigious but dangerous research. But palace records document numerous cases where royal deaths were directly caused by medical treatments rather than the illnesses they were meant to address. Medieval royal autopsy procedures reveal another shocking truth about bedroom medicine. Many monarchs were subjected to experimental dissections while they were still alive. Court physicians developed techniques for exploratory surgery that involved opening royal bodies to examine internal organs, often causing more damage than they discovered. These procedures were justified as necessary for understanding royal physiology well enough to provide appropriate medical care. The relationship between royal medicine and royal reproduction created medical protocols that endangered both monarchs and their potential heirs. Medieval physicians believed that royal fertility could be enhanced through bedroom procedures that included surgical modifications to reproductive organs, hormone treatments using animal glands, and fertility rituals that involved potentially toxic substances being applied to intimate areas. Advanced medieval royal medicine included what court documents describe as humoral balancing chambers, specialized rooms adjacent to royal bedchambers where monarchs would be exposed to controlled environments designed to adjust their internal biological systems. These chambers could be heated to induce controlled fevers, filled with specific vapors to treat respiratory problems, or maintained at precise humidity levels to address skin conditions. The pain management techniques used in royal bedroom medicine were often more dangerous than the conditions they treated. Medieval royal physicians had access to powerful narcotics and anesthetics, but their understanding of proper dosages was so limited that many pain treatments resulted in accidental overdoses. Some monarchs became so dependent on pain medications that they required increasingly dangerous combinations to achieve relief. Medieval royal dentistry, performed primarily in bedchambers for privacy reasons, involved procedures that modern oral surgeons would consider torture. Royal teeth were treated with acids that ate away infected material but also destroyed healthy tooth structure. Filled with molten metals that often caused severe burns, and sometimes completely reconstructed using teeth harvested from executed criminals or deceased servants. The diagnostic techniques used by medieval royal physicians included examining royal urine, blood, and other bodily fluids using methods that often contaminated the samples and led to incorrect diagnoses. Royal bedchambers contained specialized equipment for collecting, storing, and analyzing these specimens, often resulting in treatments for diseases the monarchs didn't actually have, while missing conditions that were genuinely threatening their health. Perhaps most tragically, medieval royal medicine often prevented monarchs from receiving folk remedies and traditional treatments that might have been more effective than the experimental procedures favoured by court physicians. Royal patients were isolated from the practical medical knowledge of common healers and subjected instead to untested theories developed by educated physicians whose social status depended on appearing more sophisticated than traditional medicine. The record-keeping systems used by medieval royal physicians provide detailed documentation of treatments that killed more patients than they cured, but these records were often falsified to protect physicians' reputations and maintain confidence in royal medical care. Palace archives contain evidence of systematic cover-ups where royal deaths caused by medical malpractice were attributed to natural causes or enemy action to avoid damaging the credibility of court medicine. As you examine the final piece of medical equipment, a collection of surgical instruments specifically designed for procedures that couldn't leave visible scars, you realize that medieval royal bedchambers were sites of medical experimentation that prioritized innovation and prestige over patient safety, turning monarchs into unwilling test subjects for treatments that advanced medical knowledge at the cost of royal lives. You press your ear against the cold stone wall of the royal bedchamber, detecting the faint sounds that reveal one of medieval history's most chilling secrets. The vast networks of human spies who turned every royal sleeping moment into an opportunity for espionage, blackmail, and political manipulation. What you're about to uncover will show you that medieval royal bedrooms were never truly private spaces, but stages where every whisper, movement, and intimate moment was observed, recorded, and weaponized by invisible audiences whose loyalty could never be guaranteed. The seemingly solid walls around you conceal a honeycomb of hidden passages and listening posts that would make modern surveillance systems seem primitive by comparison. You discover that medieval castle architecture incorporated what contemporary documents called ear chambers, specially designed acoustic spaces where professional eavesdroppers could position themselves to monitor royal conversations with crystal clarity while remaining completely undetected. Medieval royal beds were often positioned directly above hidden chambers, where teams of scribes worked throughout the night, transcribing every word spoken in the royal bedchamber. These underground offices contained sophisticated acoustic equipment, including curved metal surfaces that could amplify and focus sound, allowing spies to distinguish between different voices and even detect whispered conversations that occurred across the room from their listening positions. You examine the intricate network of speaking tubes that connected royal bedchambers to distant monitoring stations throughout medieval castles. These weren't simple communication systems. They were one-way espionage networks that allowed sounds from royal sleeping quarters to be transmitted to secret offices where intelligence analysts would interpret conversations, catalogue important information, and prepare reports for various competing interests within and beyond the royal court. The profession of royal bedroom spying created an entire underground economy of information brokers who specialized in different types of intelligence. Sleep spies focused on conversations that occurred during drowsy, unguarded moments. Dream interpreters analyzed royal sleep, talking for subconscious revelations about political intentions. Intimate surveillance specialists gathered information about royal romantic activities that could be used for blackmail or political manipulation. Medieval court records, written in deliberately obscure codes, document the existence of pillow spies, individuals who were positioned so close to royal sleeping areas that they could monitor breathing patterns, detect restless sleep that might indicate guilt or anxiety, and even analyze the content of royal dreams based on sleep movements and unconscious vocalizations. But perhaps the most insidious form of royal bedroom espionage involved the recruitment of individuals with legitimate access to royal sleeping quarters. Servants, guards, physicians, and even romantic partners were systematically corrupted by competing intelligence networks, creating situations where monarchs were literally surrounded by individuals whose primary loyalty was to foreign powers or rival political factions. The technology of medieval espionage included ingenious devices that transformed ordinary bedroom furniture into surveillance equipment. That ornate mirror reflecting candlelight across the room contains hidden compartments where tiny human observers could remain concealed for hours, watching royal activities through nearly invisible viewing slots. The elaborate tapestries covering the walls contain woven patterns that incorporate actual peepholes disguised as decorative elements. Historians still argue whether the famous Confession of the Invisible Courtier represents genuine historical testimony or medieval propaganda, but this document describes a professional spy who spent 3 years living within the walls of a royal palace, emerging only at night to gather intelligence and surviving on food passed through hidden compartments by accomplices who never knew his identity. Medieval royal bedroom surveillance extended beyond simple eavesdropping to include what contemporary sources describe as behavioural analysis, sophisticated techniques for interpreting royal psychology based on sleeping habits, dream patterns, and unconscious activities. Professional spy analysts could allegedly determine everything from military plans to succession intentions simply by observing how monarchs slept under different types of stress. The international implications of royal bedroom espionage created diplomatic crises that influenced the course of European politics. Foreign ambassadors were known to recruit servants in royal households specifically to gain access to bedroom intelligence, while some diplomatic marriages were arranged primarily to position foreign spies within rival royal bedchambers. Advanced medieval espionage operations included what palace records describe as false servant networks, elaborate deceptions where entire teams of household staff were actually foreign agents trained to perform domestic duties while gathering intelligence. These operations were so sophisticated that some spy servants maintained their false identities for decades, becoming trusted members of royal households while secretly reporting every detail of royal private life to enemy governments. The psychological warfare aspects of royal bedroom espionage were particularly devastating. Medieval monarchs lived with the constant knowledge that their most intimate moments might be observed and recorded, creating chronic paranoia that affected their ability to form genuine relationships or make confident decisions. Some rulers became so suspicious of their own servants that they preferred to sleep alone and unprotected, rather than risk exposure to potential spies. Medieval children born into royal families were targets of espionage operations from birth, with competing intelligence networks attempting to place spies among their nurses, tutors, and playmates. Royal nurseries contained the same types of hidden surveillance systems found in adult bedchambers, meaning that future monarchs grew up under constant observation that shaped their personalities and political development in ways that influenced their later reigns. The economic aspects of royal bedroom espionage created markets where information about royal sleeping habits, health conditions, and private conversations could be bought and sold like commodities. Professional intelligence brokers maintained networks of spies, analysts, and customers that operated across national boundaries, turning royal privacy into an international currency that could influence everything from trade negotiations to military alliances. Perhaps most disturbing was the practice of preemptive espionage. Surveillance operations designed not just to gather current intelligence, but to create compromising situations that could be used for future blackmail. Spy networks would engineer scenarios where royal family members would be caught in embarrassing or politically damaging situations that could be exposed whenever political pressure was needed. The counter-espionage measures developed by medieval royal courts included elaborate deception operations where false information would be deliberately leaked through suspected spy networks to mislead enemy intelligence services. Royal bedchambers became stages for carefully scripted performances designed to convince eavesdropping spies that they were gathering genuine intelligence while actually being fed manufactured misinformation. The religious implications of royal bedroom espionage created theological debates about the morality of observing monarchs in their most vulnerable moments. Some medieval church authorities argued that royal privacy was divinely protected, while others maintained that gathering intelligence about royal activities was a legitimate tool for preventing tyranny and protecting the general population from royal misconduct. As you trace the final hidden passage leading away from the royal bedchamber, you realize that medieval royal sleep was never truly private. It was a public performance conducted before invisible audiences, whose observations could determine the fate of kingdoms and the course of history itself. You creep through the shadowy corridors leading to the children's quarters of the medieval palace, unprepared for the horrifying secrets that await in the royal nurseries and chambers where young heirs face dangers far more sinister than adult political intrigue. What you're about to uncover will reveal that medieval royal childhood was a nightmare of arranged marriages to toddlers, kidnapping plots, and brutal training regimens that transformed innocent children into political weapons before they could even walk properly. The ornate cradle before you tells a story that would shock modern child protection services. This isn't just a baby's bed. It's a fortress designed to protect royal infants from assassination attempts that began before they could speak. The carved wooden sides contain hidden compartments filled with protective amulets, poison detection devices, and even tiny weapons that could be used by loyal nurses if adult guards failed to prevent attacks on helpless royal babies. Medieval royal children were considered valuable political commodities from the moment of birth, leading to practices that treated them more like precious objects than human beings. You discover contracts written when royal children were still infants, arranging marriages that would occur before their 5th birthdays, and specifying the political and financial terms of unions between children who hadn't yet learned to read the documents that would determine their entire lives. The training regimens imposed on royal children reveal a systematic approach to childhood that prioritized political utility over psychological development. 3-year-old princes were subjected to weapons training that involved actual combat with sharp blades, while 4-year-old princesses were taught seduction techniques and poison resistance through controlled exposure to increasingly dangerous substances. Palace records document the existence of child spies, royal children who are deliberately trained to gather intelligence from other noble families by forming friendships with enemy children and reporting back on conversations overheard in their playmates' homes. These operations turned innocent childhood relationships into sophisticated espionage networks, where every playdate was actually a reconnaissance mission. You examine the elaborate security systems that surrounded royal children's bedchambers, discovering that young heirs faced assassination attempts specifically designed to exploit childhood vulnerabilities. The toys scattered around the nursery aren't just playthings. Many contain hidden weapons or poison delivery systems designed to eliminate royal children while making their deaths appear accidental. Medieval royal children were also subject to what contemporary documents describe as political conditioning, systematic psychological manipulation designed to ensure their loyalty to specific political factions before they developed independent thinking abilities. Royal children would be isolated from certain family members, fed carefully constructed versions of family history, and trained to react with predetermined responses to political situations they encountered. The kidnapping attempts targeting royal children created an entire industry of child protection specialists who developed techniques for hiding young heirs, creating decoy children, and conducting rescue operations when royal offspring were successfully abducted. Some royal families maintained multiple sets of children's clothing and personal items in different locations to facilitate quick evacuations if kidnapping attempts were detected. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of medieval royal childhood was the practice of marriage consummation preparation. elaborate and traumatic procedures designed to prepare royal children for physical intimacy with their assigned spouses. These preparations began when children were as young as 6 or 7 years old and involved medical examinations, physical modifications, and psychological conditioning that would be considered severe child abuse by any modern standard. Historians still argue whether the extensive documentation of royal child abuse represents typical medieval practices or extreme cases that were recorded specifically because they were unusual. But palace archives contain enough evidence to suggest that systematic mistreatment of royal children was common enough to require specialised staff and standardised procedures. Medieval royal children faced unique medical dangers that resulted from their political value rather than their health needs. Royal physicians would perform experimental procedures on young heirs to enhance their political utility, surgeries to improve their appearance for marriage negotiations, treatments to accelerate their physical development, and even surgical modifications to their voices to make them more effective public speakers. The educational systems imposed on royal children were designed to produce political tools rather than well-rounded human beings. Royal children learned to read using documents that described torture techniques, studied mathematics through problems involving military casualties, and practiced writing by composing death warrants for hypothetical enemies. Their education prioritized practical political skills over moral development or personal happiness. Advanced royal child management included what palace records describe as emotional conditioning, systematic techniques for suppressing natural childhood emotions that might interfere with political effectiveness. Royal children were punished for displaying empathy, rewarded for demonstrating cruelty, and trained to view human relationships as political transactions rather than emotional connections. The international implications of royal child politics created situations where young heirs became pawns in diplomatic games that stretched across continents. Royal children were frequently sent to foreign courts as hostages, political marriages, or diplomatic gifts, often never seeing their birth families again and growing up in environments where their primary value was as leverage against their parents' political decisions. Medieval royal children also faced supernatural threats that were considered just as dangerous as physical assassination attempts. Royal nurseries contained elaborate spiritual protection systems designed to prevent demonic possession of young heirs, fairy kidnapping attempts, and curse attacks that might be directed at children who are too young to maintain their own magical defences. The psychological damage inflicted on medieval royal children created adults whose capacity for normal human relationships had been systematically destroyed during their formative years. Many royal children grew up to become monarchs who displayed the same patterns of paranoia, cruelty, and emotional dysfunction that had characterized their own childhoods, perpetuating cycles of abuse that affected royal families for generations. Perhaps most tragically, medieval royal children were often kept ignorant of their own family relationships to prevent emotional attachments that might interfere with political arrangements. Royal siblings might be raised separately and told they were unrelated, while parents would maintain emotional distance from their own children to avoid developing feelings that could compromise necessary political decisions. The survival rates among medieval royal children were significantly lower than among common children, not because of poverty or poor medical care, but because of the dangerous political situations they were placed in and the experimental treatments they received. Many royal children died from accidents that were actually assassination attempts, medical procedures that were too risky, or training regimens that pushed their developing bodies beyond safe limits. As you examine the final piece of evidence, a collection of children's clothing designed with hidden armour, concealed weapons, and poison detection devices, you realise that medieval royal childhood wasn't a period of innocence and play, but a brutal training ground where children were systematically transformed into political weapons through methods that destroyed their humanity while preparing them for the equally brutal world of adult royal politics. You slip through the heavy curtains into the private chambers of a medieval monarch in the depths of night, witnessing scenes of psychological torment that reveal the hidden madness lurking behind the crown's golden facade. What you're about to discover will expose how the pressures of absolute power, combined with medieval medicine's dangerous treatments and the constant threat of assassination, created royal minds that descended into spectacular madness that was carefully concealed from subjects who needed to believe in their ruler's divine wisdom. The first signs of royal mental breakdown are written in the bizarre arrangements of furniture that surround you. Medieval monarchs experiencing psychological collapse would compulsively rearrange their bedchambers according to patterns that made sense only to their deteriorating minds. You observe chairs positioned to face empty corners where the monarch would hold conversations with invisible advisors, tables arranged in protective circles around the bed to ward off imaginary threats, and mirrors turned toward the walls to prevent hostile reflections from emerging during vulnerable, sleeping hours. Medieval court physicians had no understanding of mental illness as we recognize it today, leading to treatments that accelerated royal psychological decline rather than providing help. You discover evidence of medical procedures designed to release evil humours from royal brains, treatments that involved drilling holes in monarchs' skulls, bleeding them until they lost consciousness, and force-feeding them mercury-based compounds that caused hallucinations and permanent neurological damage. The isolation that came with absolute power created perfect conditions for the development of severe paranoia and delusional thinking. Medieval monarchs lived in environments where they could never be certain whether the people around them were genuine allies or potential assassins, leading to mental states where distinguishing between real and imagined threats became impossible. Royal bedchambers became stages for elaborate paranoid rituals, where monarchs would spend hours each night checking for hidden enemies, testing their own food and drink, and conducting conversations with trusted advisors who might actually be hallucinations. Palace records, written in carefully coded language to avoid documenting royal mental illness directly, describe monarchs who would spend entire nights engaged in battles with invisible demons, negotiate treaties with furniture they believed contained the spirits of deceased enemies, and issue complex royal decrees to address problems that existed only in their deteriorating minds. You examine the restraint systems that were discreetly built into royal bedchamber furniture, ornate chairs with hidden straps, beds with concealed restraining mechanisms, and decorative wall fixtures that could be used to secure a monarch who had become dangerous to themselves or others during psychological episodes. These systems were designed to look like normal royal furnishings, while providing the capability to control monarchs whose mental illness made them violent or self-destructive. The relationship between royal madness and political power created situations where entire kingdoms were effectively ruled by the delusional fantasies of mentally ill monarchs. Court advisors developed elaborate systems for interpreting royal ravings and translating psychotic episodes into coherent government policies. Some of history's most significant political decisions may have originated in the hallucinations of insane rulers whose courtiers were too afraid to acknowledge their sovereign's mental condition. Medieval royal children were particularly vulnerable to developing severe mental illness because they grew up in environments specifically designed to create psychological stress and emotional dysfunction. Royal offspring were systematically isolated from normal human relationships, subjected to constant threats and pressure, and trained to view the world as fundamentally hostile and dangerous. Many developed what modern psychologists would recognize as severe personality disorders, depression, and anxiety conditions that manifested in bizarre behaviors that courtiers had to pretend were signs of royal wisdom. Historians still argue whether famous cases of royal madness were genuine mental illness or elaborate performances designed to avoid political responsibility. But palace archives contain medical records describing treatments for royal psychological conditions that suggest genuine mental health crises were common among medieval monarchs. The supernatural beliefs that pervaded medieval courts created additional layers of psychological stress for royal minds that were already strained by political pressures. Monarchs who believed they were constantly threatened by demons, ghosts, and magical attacks developed symptoms that modern psychiatrists would associate with severe anxiety disorders, paranoid schizophrenia, and delusional thinking patterns that made rational decision-making impossible. Advanced cases of royal madness required the development of what palace documents describe as reality management systems. Elaborate deceptions designed to make mentally ill monarchs believe that their delusions were actually occurring. Court staff would stage fake battles to satisfy monarchs who believed they were fighting invisible enemies, create fictional diplomatic correspondence to address paranoid fantasies about international conspiracies, and even employ actors to portray the historical figures that insane rulers claim to be receiving visits from. The inheritance of mental illness through royal bloodlines created dynastic patterns of madness that affected entire royal families for generations. Medieval physicians had no understanding of genetic factors in mental health, leading to royal breeding practices that concentrated psychological instability within ruling families. Some royal houses developed reputations for producing consistently unstable rulers, but this information was carefully suppressed to maintain public confidence in royal authority. The treatment of royal mental illness often involved religious ceremonies that were more likely to worsen psychological conditions than improve them. Mentally ill monarchs would be subjected to exorcism rituals, forced to participate in intense spiritual exercises, and encouraged to interpret their symptoms as divine messages rather than signs of illness needing medical treatment. Perhaps most tragically, royal mental illness was often exploited by courtiers who recognized that unstable monarchs could be manipulated more easily than psychologically healthy rulers. Palace records document cases where court advisors deliberately encouraged royal delusions and paranoid fantasies because mentally ill monarchs were more likely to approve political decisions that benefited their handlers rather than the kingdom as a whole. The secrecy surrounding royal madness created situations where entire kingdoms could be governed by regency councils, while subjects remained unaware that their supposed rulers were actually confined to their bedchambers in states of complete psychological collapse. Some monarchs spent years in hidden madness, while official court announcements continued to attribute government decisions to their royal authority. The physical symptoms of royal mental illness were often mistaken for supernatural phenomena by medieval observers who had no framework for understanding psychological conditions. Monarchs experiencing severe depression might be described as being visited by melancholy spirits, while those suffering from paranoid episodes would be said to be receiving divine warnings about threats to their kingdoms. As you witness the final scene of royal psychological torment, a monarch arguing violently with their own reflection in a mirror, convinced that it represents a hostile imposter trying to steal their identity, you realize that medieval royal madness wasn't just personal tragedy, but political catastrophe that affected entire populations who lived under rulers whose grip on reality had been completely severed by the impossible pressures of absolute power. You stand in the suffocating darkness of a royal deathbed chamber, where the flickering candlelight illuminates one of medieval history's most sinister secrets: the elaborate conspiracies, poison plots, and cover-ups that transformed royal final moments into carefully orchestrated murders disguised as natural deaths. What you're about to uncover will reveal that medieval royal deathbeds were crime scenes where the most powerful people in Europe were systematically eliminated by enemies who understood that controlling the circumstances of a monarch's death could determine the fate of entire kingdoms. The ornate deathbed before you tells a story that would horrify modern forensic investigators. Every element of this scene has been carefully arranged to conceal evidence of murder while creating the appearance of peaceful royal passing. The silk pillows contain hidden compartments where poison-soaked cloths were concealed until the final moments. The golden goblet beside the bed shows traces of substances that were designed to accelerate death while mimicking natural illness. And even the religious artifacts surrounding the dying monarch served double duty as delivery systems for lethal compounds. Medieval royal deaths were rarely spontaneous events. They were political operations that required months of planning, teams of conspirators, and sophisticated knowledge of poisons, anatomy, and court protocols. You examine the evidence of what contemporary documents call death engineering, the systematic science of eliminating royal targets through methods that would appear to be divine judgment, natural illness, or accidental misfortune rather than deliberate assassination. The poison delivery systems used in royal deathbed murders were masterworks of medieval chemistry and engineering. Palace records document the existence of specialized artisans who created elaborate mechanisms for administering lethal substances through apparently innocent objects. The royal crown itself could be lined with compounds that would slowly poison the wearer through skin contact, while royal rings contained tiny needles that would inject toxins when the monarch performed routine gestures like blessing courtiers or signing documents. Court physicians played crucial roles in royal death conspiracies, using their medical authority to disguise murder as treatment and to provide official explanations for suspicious deaths that would satisfy both the general public and potential investigators. Medieval medical knowledge was limited enough that almost any death could be attributed to imbalanced humours or divine punishment without raising questions that might expose assassination plots. You discover evidence of what medieval sources describe as succession poisoning, elaborate plots designed not just to eliminate current monarchs, but to ensure that their deaths would occur under circumstances that would benefit specific heirs or political factions. These operations involved precise timing that coordinated royal deaths with political events, military campaigns, or diplomatic negotiations to maximize their strategic impact. The international implications of royal death conspiracies created networks of assassination specialists who operated across national boundaries, selling their services to rival kingdoms and competing political factions. Some poisoners developed such sophisticated reputations that they could command fees equivalent to entire military campaigns, and their success in eliminating royal targets could shift the balance of power across continents. Medieval royal autopsy procedures were deliberately primitive to prevent the discovery of evidence that might expose death conspiracies. Palace records reveal that royal physicians were often instructed to conduct only superficial examinations of deceased monarchs, and that more thorough investigations were actively discouraged to maintain the official narrative surrounding royal deaths. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of royal death conspiracies was the systematic elimination of witnesses who might have knowledge about the true circumstances of royal deaths. Medieval palace records document patterns where servants, guards, and even family members who were present during royal deaths would themselves die under suspicious circumstances within weeks or months of the original assassination, creating cover-ups that extended far beyond the initial murder. The timing of royal deaths reveals patterns that suggest coordinated assassination campaigns designed to eliminate entire royal bloodlines during periods of political vulnerability. Historical analysis shows clusters of royal deaths that occurred during succession crises, international conflicts, or religious upheavals, timing that was too convenient to be coincidental and indicates sophisticated intelligence networks that could identify optimal moments for eliminating royal targets. Historians still argue whether the high mortality rates among medieval royals represent natural consequences of stressful lifestyles or evidence of systematic assassination campaigns. But statistical analysis of royal death patterns reveals anomalies that are difficult to explain without considering organised murder plots. Advanced royal death conspiracies involved what palace documents describe as layered assassination. Complex plots where multiple different lethal methods were employed simultaneously to ensure that the target would die, regardless of which specific technique proved most effective. A single royal victim might be poisoned, infected with disease, and subjected to medical treatments that were designed to be fatal, creating redundant systems that guaranteed death while making it impossible to identify the specific cause. The psychological warfare aspects of royal death conspiracies were as important as the physical elimination of targets. Public executions of suspected royal poisoners, whether guilty or innocent, served to demonstrate royal power while simultaneously concealing the real assassination networks that remained active and undetected within palace staffs. Medieval royal children were particularly vulnerable to death conspiracies because their murders could be more easily disguised as natural childhood illnesses or accidents. Palace records document suspicious patterns of deaths among royal heirs that suggest systematic campaigns to eliminate entire bloodlines by targeting the youngest and most vulnerable members of royal families. The economic motivations behind royal death conspiracies created markets where assassination contracts could be bought and sold like commodities. Wealthy merchants, foreign governments, and competing noble families would invest in royal death plots as political speculation, betting that the elimination of specific monarchs would create opportunities for profitable political changes. Perhaps most disturbing was the practice of legacy poisoning, assassination techniques designed to kill royal victims slowly enough that they could complete important political actions before dying, allowing conspirators to manipulate dying monarchs into making decisions that would benefit their murderers. These operations required intimate knowledge of poison effects and could extend over months or even years of gradual assassination. The religious cover-ups surrounding royal death conspiracies involved church authorities who would provide divine explanations for suspicious deaths, conduct funeral services that emphasized natural causes, and sometimes even declare murdered monarchs to be martyrs or saints to prevent investigations that might expose assassination plots. Counter-conspiracy efforts by loyal royal guards included elaborate deception operations, where suspected assassins would be fed false information about royal routines, given access to fake poison delivery opportunities, and allowed to believe their plots were succeeding while actually being monitored and controlled by royal security forces. As you examine the final piece of evidence, a collection of natural death medical reports that contain carefully coded references to assassination methods, you realize that medieval royal deathbeds were theatres where some of history's most sophisticated murder plots played out under the guise of divine will and natural mortality. You enter the hushed sanctity of the royal treasure chamber adjacent to the bedchamber, where the flickering light of consecrated candles illuminates a collection of sacred relics, cursed artifacts, and mystical objects so powerful and dangerous that medieval monarchs risked their souls just by sleeping in their presence. What you're about to discover will reveal that royal bedrooms were repositories for some of history's most mysterious and terrifying objects, items that could allegedly grant divine power, curse entire bloodlines, or bridge the gap between the earthly realm and supernatural forces that no mortal should dare to contact. The ornate reliquary, positioned closest to the royal bed, contains what medieval sources claim is a fragment of the true cross, but the elaborate protective measures surrounding it suggest something far more dangerous than simple holy wood. The container itself is constructed from 7 different blessed metals and sealed with locks that require keys blessed by different religious authorities, indicating that this relic possesses power so volatile that even accidental contact could have catastrophic consequences for anyone unprepared to handle its divine energy. Medieval royal relic collections represented more than religious devotion. They were arsenals of supernatural weapons that monarchs believed could influence everything from military battles to diplomatic negotiations. you examine artifacts that were allegedly used by biblical figures, saints, and ancient rulers, each item carefully positioned within the royal sleeping area to provide maximum spiritual protection while remaining close enough for emergency use during supernatural crises. The most intriguing objects in the royal collection are those with darker histories, cursed items that previous owners had died attempting to destroy, artifacts stolen from rival royal families along with the supernatural consequences of their theft, and mysterious objects whose origins were so ancient that their original purposes had been forgotten while their dangerous reputations remained intact. Palace inventories document the existence of what medieval sources called proximity artifacts, sacred objects that were believed to provide benefits simply by being near sleeping monarchs. These items required constant maintenance by specialized priests who would monitor them for signs of spiritual decay, perform renewal rituals to maintain their power, and occasionally remove objects that had become corrupted or dangerous through prolonged exposure to royal dreams and unconscious emanations. You discover evidence of what contemporary documents describe as relic warfare. Diplomatic and military conflicts fought over possession of specific sacred artifacts that were believed to guarantee victory, divine protection, or supernatural authority to their owners. Some medieval wars were motivated more by desires to capture enemy relics than by territorial or political ambitions. The authentication systems used to verify royal relics reveal sophisticated understanding of what we might recognize as early forensic science. Medieval relic experts developed techniques for testing the age, origin, and spiritual authenticity of sacred objects, though their methods were often based on supernatural beliefs rather than scientific principles. Some authentication procedures involved exposing suspected forgeries to genuine holy objects to see if they would react, while others required testing potential relics on condemned criminals to observe their spiritual effects. Medieval royal bedchambers also contained what palace records describe as negative relics, cursed or evil objects that were kept under strict containment to prevent their malevolent influence from affecting the royal family. These items were usually inherited from defeated enemies, discovered in conquered territories, or acquired through diplomatic exchanges that included supernatural as well as political components. But perhaps the most dangerous artifacts in royal collections were those that allegedly provided direct communication with divine or supernatural entities. Medieval monarchs possessed objects that were supposed to allow conversations with deceased predecessors, divine beings or otherworldly advisors, communications that could provide crucial political intelligence, but also risked exposing royal souls to spiritual corruption or possession. The seasonal rotation of royal relics created elaborate calendar systems that determined which artifacts would be positioned near the royal bed during different times of the year. Medieval court astrologers and religious advisors collaborated to create schedules that would maximize the beneficial effects of various relics while minimizing potential conflicts between objects whose spiritual energies might be incompatible. Historians still argue whether the extensive royal relic collections represent genuine religious faith or sophisticated psychological manipulation systems, but contemporary accounts describe specific incidents where royal relics allegedly demonstrated supernatural powers that influenced political events and military outcomes. Advanced royal relic management involved what medieval sources describe as spiritual maintenance, elaborate procedures for keeping sacred objects in optimal condition while preventing them from becoming corrupted. Through exposure to the moral compromises that were inevitable in royal political life, some relics required regular purification rituals, while others needed to be periodically removed from royal presence to prevent their holy power from being contaminated by royal sins. The inheritance of royal relics created succession problems that were sometimes more complex than political disputes over throne succession. Medieval royal families developed elaborate protocols for determining which heirs would receive which artifacts, taking into account not just political considerations but also spiritual compatibility between potential owners and their inherited relics. International relic diplomacy involved exchanges of sacred objects between royal courts as tokens of alliance, tribute payments, or peace offerings. These transactions required specialized negotiators who understood both the political and supernatural implications of transferring powerful artifacts between different royal bloodlines. The security systems protecting royal relics included both physical and spiritual defenses that were designed to prevent theft, while also protecting unauthorized individuals from accidental exposure to dangerous supernatural forces. Royal relic chambers contained elaborate alarm systems, protective barriers, and containment procedures that would isolate compromised artifacts if their spiritual integrity was threatened. Perhaps most fascinating were the royal relics that were believed to be growing in power over time through their association with royal bloodlines. Medieval sources describe artifacts that became more potent through prolonged exposure to royal presence, developing new abilities and increasing their spiritual influence over successive generations of royal ownership. The medical applications of royal relics included their use in treating royal illnesses through contact healing, spiritual purification, and supernatural intervention. Court physicians would prescribe specific relics for different medical conditions, sometimes requiring patients to sleep with particular artifacts or undergo treatment procedures that involved direct contact with sacred objects. Counter-relic operations developed by rival courts included attempts to steal, destroy, or corrupt enemy royal artifact collections through magical attacks, spiritual sabotage, and the introduction of cursed objects disguised as authentic relics. Some international conflicts involved sophisticated supernatural warfare where competing royal families attempted to neutralize each other's relic collections. The psychological effects of living surrounded by allegedly powerful supernatural artifacts created unique mental stresses for medieval royals who believed that their every action was being observed and judged by the spiritual forces contained within their relic collections. Some monarchs developed obsessive relationships with specific artifacts, while others became paralyzed by fear of accidentally offending the supernatural entities they believed resided in their sacred objects. As you examine the final artifact, an ornate box that allegedly contains air breathed by a saint but whose elaborate containment system suggests something far more dangerous, you realize that medieval royal bedchambers were more than sleeping quarters. They were supernatural armories where the most powerful people in Europe surrounded themselves with forces they barely understood, but desperately hoped would protect them from the earthly and otherworldly threats that defined royal life. You settle into the pre-dawn silence of the royal bedchamber, witnessing the strange rituals that surrounded medieval royal sleep. As monarchs attempted to decode the prophetic messages and divine guidance they believed were delivered through their dreams. What you're about to uncover will reveal that medieval royal sleep wasn't just rest. It was a nightly journey into a supernatural realm where the fate of kingdoms could be determined by the symbolic visions that visited sleeping monarchs, and where the interpretation of royal dreams became a sophisticated political science that influenced everything from military campaigns to marriage negotiations. The elaborate dream recording system that surrounds the royal bed represents one of medieval history's most sophisticated information-gathering operations. You observe scribes positioned in hidden alcoves throughout the bedchamber, equipped with specially designed writing materials that allow them to work in complete darkness while transcribing every word uttered by the sleeping monarch. These dream stenographers were trained to distinguish between meaningful prophetic utterances and ordinary sleep talking, creating detailed records that would be analysed by teams of specialists each morning. Medieval royal dream interpretation involved far more than simple symbolic analysis. It was a complex intelligence operation that combined religious theology, political analysis, and what we might recognise today as psychological profiling. court dream analysts maintained extensive libraries of reference materials that correlated specific dream symbols with historical events, allowing them to provide interpretations that could guide crucial political decisions based on the supernatural messages allegedly received during royal sleep. You examine the intricate collection of dream enhancement devices positioned around the royal sleeping area, objects designed to influence the content and clarity of royal dreams to ensure that monarchs would receive the most useful prophetic guidance. Sacred crystals were positioned to focus divine energy, specific herbs were burned to induce particular types of visions, and even the bedding was woven with threads that had been blessed to enhance spiritual communication during sleep. The political implications of royal dream interpretation created situations where entire military campaigns were planned based on symbolic visions that visiting monarchs experienced during diplomatic visits. Foreign ambassadors learned to time their negotiations around royal sleep schedules, understanding that crucial political decisions were often made not through rational analysis, but through interpretations of whatever dreams the monarch had experienced the previous night. Palace records document the existence of what medieval sources called dream spies, individuals who are trained to influence royal dreams through subtle psychological manipulation, carefully timed sounds or scents, and even physical interventions that could guide sleeping monarchs toward experiencing specific types of visions that would benefit particular political factions. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of royal dream politics was the development of prophetic authentication, elaborate procedures for verifying whether royal dreams represented genuine divine communication or merely psychological phenomena. Court theologians developed tests that involved comparing dream content with historical patterns, checking for consistency with established religious doctrine, and sometimes even staging events to see if dream prophecies would come true as predicted. Medieval royal children were trained from early ages to remember and report their dreams with extraordinary detail, understanding that their nighttime visions might contain crucial information about their future reigns, potential threats to the royal family, or divine guidance about political decisions they would need to make as adults. Royal nurseries contained dream recording equipment that was scaled down for children, creating archives of prophetic visions that spanned entire royal bloodlines. The seasonal patterns of royal dreams were carefully tracked by court analysts who discovered that monarchs tended to experience different types of prophetic visions during various times of the year. Spring dreams allegedly focused on fertility and growth. Summer visions dealt with military campaigns and conquest. Autumn dreams provided guidance about harvest and economic policy, while winter dreams often contained warnings about death, disease, and political upheaval. Historians still argue whether the extensive documentation of royal dreams represents genuine religious experiences or elaborate psychological manipulation systems, but the detailed records suggest that dream interpretation played a significant role in actual political decision-making throughout medieval Europe. Advanced royal dream analysis involved what contemporary documents describe as collective interpretation, collaborative efforts where teams of specialists would analyze the same royal dream from different perspectives to provide comprehensive guidance about its political and spiritual implications. These interpretation sessions could involve dozens of experts and continue for days before reaching conclusions about how dream messages should influence royal policy. The international implications of royal dream interpretation created diplomatic protocols where monarchs would share selected dream content with foreign rulers as tokens of trust, warnings about mutual threats, or invitations to form alliances based on shared prophetic visions. Some international treaties included clauses that referenced specific royal dreams and the political interpretations that had been derived from them. Medieval royal dream enhancement techniques included what palace sources describe as induced prophecy, systematic methods for encouraging monarchs to experience specific types of visions that would provide guidance about particular political problems. These techniques involved controlled diets, regulated sleep schedules, exposure to specific environments, and even medical treatments designed to alter brain chemistry in ways that would promote prophetic dreaming. The inheritance of royal dream interpretation created dynasties of court analysts whose families specialized in understanding the particular dream patterns and symbolic languages associated with specific royal bloodlines. These hereditary dream interpreters developed intimate knowledge of royal psychology that allowed them to provide increasingly sophisticated analysis of monarchs' nighttime visions. Perhaps most intriguingly, some royal courts developed what medieval sources describe as dream verification systems, elaborate procedures for testing whether royal prophetic visions were accurate by staging controlled events that would allow dream predictions to be fulfilled or disproven under observable conditions. The medical understanding of royal dreams included theories about how different types of illness, stress, or spiritual conditions could influence the quality and content of prophetic visions. Court physicians would prescribe specific treatments designed to improve royal dream clarity, increase the frequency of prophetic experiences, or eliminate nightmares that were believed to represent spiritual attacks rather than natural psychological phenomena. Counter-dream operations developed by rival courts included attempts to disrupt enemy royal sleep through magical attacks, psychological manipulation, and even the introduction of substances designed to prevent clear prophetic dreaming. Some international conflicts involved sophisticated spiritual warfare, where competing royal families attempted to interfere with each other's divine communication systems. The religious implications of royal dream interpretation created theological debates about the relationship between divine revelation and political authority. Medieval church leaders argued about whether royal dreams represented direct communication from God, or potentially dangerous communications from less divine sources that might mislead monarchs into making ungodly political decisions. As you witness the final scene of royal dream interpretation, court analysts frantically transcribing and debating the meaning of a monarch's pre-dawn utterances, while political decisions that will affect thousands of lives hang in the balance. You realize that medieval royal sleep was far more than personal rest. It was a nightly consultation with supernatural forces that shaped the course of European history through the mysterious language of dreams. You stand at the threshold of the final royal bedchamber, where the weight of centuries seems to press down upon your shoulders as you witness the elaborate preparations that medieval monarchs made for their eternal rest. What you're about to discover will reveal that royal death was not an ending but a carefully orchestrated transition into an afterlife where political power, spiritual authority, and supernatural influence were believed to continue beyond the grave, requiring preparations so complex and expensive that they could bankrupt kingdoms and reshape the architectural landscape of medieval Europe. The ornate tomb preparation chamber, adjacent to the royal sleeping quarters, contains evidence of planning that began decades before the monarch's actual death. Medieval royals lived with constant awareness of their mortality, not just from assassination attempts and political dangers, but from the elaborate theological requirements that governed royal transitions into the afterlife. You examine detailed architectural plans for tomb complexes that would take years to construct, requiring the labour of hundreds of craftsmen and the resources of entire kingdoms to create resting places worthy of divinely appointed rulers. Medieval royal funeral preparations involved more than simple burial arrangements. They were complex theological operations designed to ensure that deceased monarchs would retain their political authority in the spiritual realm, while also providing maximum benefit to their surviving heirs and kingdoms. Palace records document the existence of death architects, specialists who designed not just physical tombs, but entire spiritual transition systems that would supposedly allow royal souls to maintain influence over earthly affairs even after physical death. You discover the elaborate embalming systems that were developed specifically for royal corpses, involving techniques that went far beyond simple preservation to include spiritual enhancements designed to prepare royal bodies for resurrection, divine judgment, and eternal rule in heavenly kingdoms. These procedures required rare chemicals, precious metals, and sacred substances that had to be gathered from across the known world, creating international supply chains that existed solely to serve royal death preparation. The political implications of royal death preparation created succession systems where the elaborate nature of funeral arrangements could determine which heirs would actually inherit royal authority. Medieval succession law was often ambiguous enough that the heir who could organise the most impressive funeral display might be recognised as the legitimate successor, regardless of their actual legal claim to the throne. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of royal death preparation was the development of what medieval sources called posthumous governance systems. Elaborate arrangements where deceased monarchs were believed to continue ruling their kingdoms through supernatural communication with their successors. Royal tombs contained speaking tubes, mechanical devices, and spiritual communication systems that allegedly allowed living rulers to consult with their deceased predecessors about important political decisions. Medieval royal death involved elaborate timing calculations that coordinated the moment of death with astrological events, religious celebrations, and political necessities. Some monarchs spent their final years planning the exact circumstances of their deaths to ensure maximum spiritual and political benefit, while others were kept alive through dangerous medical interventions until astronomically favourable death timing could be achieved. The international implications of royal death created diplomatic protocols where the funeral arrangements of foreign monarchs could influence military campaigns, trade relationships, and marriage negotiations. Some wars were postponed or accelerated based on royal death schedules, while others were fought primarily to capture the bodies of deceased enemy rulers whose spiritual power was believed to be transferable through proper burial arrangements. Advanced royal death preparation included what palace documents describe as spiritual insurance systems, elaborate arrangements designed to protect royal souls from damnation, purgatory, or other posthumous punishments that might result from the moral compromises required by political leadership. These systems involved massive charitable donations, construction of religious institutions, and sometimes even the foundation of entire monastic communities whose sole purpose was to pray for royal souls throughout eternity. The economic impact of royal death preparation could devastate kingdoms that spent enormous resources on funeral arrangements while neglecting practical governance needs. Some medieval kingdoms never recovered from the financial burdens created by elaborate royal death preparations, leading to political instability, foreign conquest, or economic collapse that affected entire populations for generations. Medieval royal tomb design incorporated security features that were designed to protect royal remains from both physical disturbance and spiritual attack. Royal burial sites contained elaborate trap systems, protective barriers, and supernatural defences that would supposedly punish anyone who attempted to disturb royal eternal rest or steal the valuable grave goods that accompanied royal corpses into the afterlife. The inheritance of royal death preparation created complex legal systems where the responsibilities and privileges associated with caring for deceased monarchs could be passed down through generations of specialized families. These hereditary tomb guardians maintained elaborate facilities, performed regular spiritual maintenance, and sometimes even claimed to receive political guidance from the royal spirits they were charged with protecting. Historians still argue whether the elaborate royal death preparations represent genuine spiritual beliefs or sophisticated political theatre designed to maintain royal authority beyond physical death. But the massive resources devoted to these systems suggest that medieval societies took posthumous royal influence very seriously. Perhaps most remarkably, some royal death preparations included arrangements for the eventual resurrection and return of deceased monarchs during times of national crisis. Medieval royal tombs contained provisions, weapons, and communication systems that would supposedly allow dead rulers to return to life and resume their reigns when their kingdoms faced existential threats. The religious implications of royal death preparation created theological debates about the relationship between earthly political authority and divine spiritual power. Medieval church leaders struggled to reconcile royal claims to continued posthumous influence with Christian doctrines about death, judgment, and eternal life, leading to complex theological compromises that influenced religious development throughout Europe. Counter-death operations developed by rival kingdoms included attempts to disrupt enemy royal funeral preparations, steal royal corpses for political leverage, and even conduct spiritual attacks designed to prevent deceased enemy monarchs from providing supernatural assistance to their successors. The psychological impact of living with elaborate death preparations affected medieval royals throughout their reigns, creating rulers who are simultaneously obsessed with their own mortality and convinced of their eternal importance. This combination of death anxiety and megalomaniacal confidence influenced political decisions that shaped the development of medieval European civilization. As you witness the final preparations for royal eternal rest, craftsmen putting finishing touches on a tomb that has consumed decades of labour and the wealth of nations, you realize that medieval royal death was not the end of political power, but its transformation into something that was believed to transcend the limitations of mortal life, creating spiritual monarchies that would supposedly influence earthly affairs throughout eternity. The candles begin to dim as dawn approaches, and the weight of centuries of royal secrets settles around you like a heavy blanket. You've journeyed through the hidden corridors of medieval power, witnessed the private fears and public facades of history's most powerful people, and discovered that behind the golden crowns and silk curtains lay human beings struggling with the impossible demands of absolute authority. Their bedchambers were never sanctuaries of peace, but battlegrounds where political ambition, supernatural terror, and human vulnerability fought their most intimate wars. As the shadows lengthen and your eyelids grow heavy, let these ancient secrets fade into the gentle embrace of sleep, knowing that the royal nightmares of the past need no longer disturb your rest. The dark secrets of medieval bedchambers have been revealed, their power to frighten diminished by the light of understanding, leaving only the soft whisper of history's voice to guide you toward peaceful dreams, where crowns are just symbols, power is just illusion, and sleep is simply the gentle gift it was always meant to be.